Started, everybody. I'm Ken Oliver, Senior Director of the Texas Public Policy Foundation's Right on Immigration campaign. We're focused on research and solutions at the national and increasingly the state level that will first and foremost secure the border. And then with border security as the essential foundation, we want to go on and fix and improve legal immigration to the United States in a way that is consistent across the board with our country's best interests. So the context of our conversation this afternoon is the collapse of border security this past year, as evidenced by the largely uncontrolled and overwhelming influx of several thousand people each and every day coming across our border, hundreds of thousands a month, unauthorized migrants all over the world coming, who are trekking across the border. So much so that record numbers, even in the hundreds of thousands, are among the gotaways, those that are not apprehended. So this is due to an administration in Washington that instead of stopping the massive abuse of our asylum system, as was previously being done, is actually, we have an administration that's actually facilitating mass abuse of the asylum system, as well as practically handcuffing our ICE officers from conducting deportation removals of unauthorized migrants who are coming in. So that's really a perfect storm, and that's just to frame our discussion this afternoon. We're talking about the abdication of federal responsibility, including what many who work with us cite as a core constitutional responsibility to protect the states from invasion. The states do have a constitutional authorized power to repel invasion, which up until now has not ever been formally invoked, though my colleague at Texas Public Policy Foundation, Josh Trevino, will point out that the Texas Rangers did indeed invoke, or not invoke it, but practically use that authority back in the cross-border raid era of our history. So now that we've framed the issue, let's talk to the best people we could assemble about the Biden border crisis and what the state of Texas and other states can do about it and are doing about it. And that's starting with the man who up until August of last year was the chief of the United States Border Patrol and who since October of this year is my colleague, Rodney Scott, Texas Public Policy Foundation. Rodney is our Senior Distinguished Fellow for Border Security since October, and by way of introduction, Rodney, Chief Scott, started his career 30 years ago as a frontline Border Patrol agent. Since 2012, he was in the Senior Executive Service of the federal government, never a political appointee, a career public servant of the country. And before leading the Border Patrol, he has over 20,000 agents. He was chief also of the Deputy Executive Director, I should say, of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection's Office of Anti-Terrorism, in addition to many other field assignments. And alongside Rodney is Texas Department of Public Safety Director, Colonel Steve McCraw, a native of El Paso. Colonel McCraw also worked his way up through the ranks, from trooper to with the Texas Highway Patrol to DPS narcotics agent, and as a FBI special agent, where he was unit chief of the Colombian Mexican Organized Crime Unit, inspector in charge of the Southeast Bomb Task Force, and assistant director of the Office of Intelligence that was created by the FBI after 9/11. Colonel McCraw in 2004 became Texas Homeland Security Director in the Office of the Governor before assuming his current role as Director of DPS, which is the preeminent agency in the execution of Operation Lone Star, launched in March of last year. And last but not least is Texas Deputy Attorney General Aaron Reitz, who has been responsible for executing Attorney General Ken Paxton's lawsuits against the Biden administration on immigration law enforcement and related policies. Reitz is a proud graduate of Texas A&M University, where he was regimental commander of the Corps of Cadets, and was subsequently commissioned as an officer in the United States Marine Corps. He spent several years in deployment in Afghanistan, embedded with the Afghan National Army. That was followed by law school at the University of Texas School of Law, where he was president of the Federalist Society, Texas chapter, and the editor-in-chief of the Texas Review of Law and Politics. He clerked on the Texas Supreme Court and was in private practice before joining the Office of the Attorney General. So gentlemen, let's jump right into this. We're going to first get Rodney's take on how severe, Rodney, in your judgment, how severe is this crisis in terms of national security? And at the federal level, how has it affected our security in the last year since you've been in charge of the country's border security?
Well, thank you, and thank you guys for being here today. I think it's a very important topic. It's a huge, huge threat to this country, and let me kind of explain. There's a lot of misinformation from the Biden administration that goes out. They talk in partial truths and they spin things. They talk about the numbers and they compare them to a different time in history where we had a lot of illegal aliens crossing the border. But let me make sure everybody understands this crisis is like no crisis we've ever had before because it was policy induced. My entire 30-year career, we've been systematically improving border security day over day, regardless of the administration. Different administrations worked harder than others, but we've been improving border security. 9/11 and the creation of DHS really fast-forwarded that. The border wall system was created based on requirements from the U.S. Border Patrol. We were getting better. This current administration made policy decisions that created the crisis we had today. This is not a surge, another traditional surge that you would hear about. The other big thing that changed is the demographics. Early in my career, when I think the last time we caught over 1 million people, 1.6 million or something like that, it was primarily Mexican adult males. They are returned back to Mexico within 6 to 8 hours, and many of them crossed again. It was very different than today, where you've got at least 150 different nationalities. Before I left my position, 14 people on the known or suspected terrorist list. But the other demographic, and please understand this, the border's a transit zone. So the people at the border see it the most, but nothing stays at the border. So all these things that people just put a number to, all these threats, they're going to cities all over the United States. They're coming to Austin, they're going to Oklahoma City, they're going everywhere. And unlike early in my career, every part of that border is controlled by Mexican cartel. There were in the early 90s, literally migrants that walked up to the border, looked left and right. Many of you, if you've ever lived along the border, can remember those days when maybe they would show up and ask for food or water, and they were kind of guiding themselves. Those days are gone. Nothing crosses the border without the cartels controlling it. And they're using the massive numbers today in a way that we've never seen before. They push large groups of people willing to try to claim asylum across the border. They overwhelm the Border Patrol agents, and then it creates huge controllable gaps in border security, and that's where the fentanyl, the heroin, the cocaine, the terrorists, the criminals are coming through that the governor talked about earlier this morning. But I think the most important thing to take away from this conversation today is these were policy decisions that were put in place that created this, that could be overturned, and we could make some huge improvements very, very quickly. But right now, and you talk to any Border Patrol agent out there, the other big difference is this is the first time in my 30-year career, and I believe in the history of this country, that we've literally not tried. There's zero effort. I can tell you from the conversations I had after January 20th last year until the end of August, when I was asked to not be in that job anymore by the Biden administration, there was any discussion whatsoever about how do we secure the border or how do we slow the flow was stymied. The commissioner, the newly appointed commissioner, was in Yuma about a week ago. Some of the agents told me. He told the agents to their face, there's no policy issues. It's literally just a manpower, and they're not processing people fast enough. That's the problem. We've never had that type of a mindset in my entire career. This is a crisis. It's not just a border crisis. It's not just an immigration crisis. This is a national security crisis.
I want to go to Aaron because our state's pushback against the Biden administration began with Attorney General Ken Paxton, and I'd like you to walk us through a little bit the strategy behind what has been done and what's been accomplished in the Attorney General's office.
Yeah, thanks very much. So we are very blessed in Texas to have an Attorney General that understands that through the deliberate policy choices of this administration, wave upon wave of illegal immigration poses one of, if not the greatest threats to our country right now, and what will remain one of the greatest threats for many, many years to come. And so Attorney General Paxton rightly understands the scope and the nature of the problem and has elected to devote the critical mass of his resources in order to sort of stand in between this awful administration and the people of Texas like a legal, big, beautiful wall is Ken Paxton, okay? And so what we have done is we have, in an unrelenting manner, sued the Biden administration to hold them accountable. Okay, so to give you a little bit of context into which we're waging this immigration fight against the Biden administration, understand first that since January 20th, when President Biden was inaugurated, up until the present day, it's almost his one-year anniversary tomorrow, we are engaged in 26 individual pieces of litigation with the Biden administration in federal court. Over the course of 1 year, 26 lawsuits. Of those 26, 19 of them are offensive. In other words, Attorney General Paxton, representing the state of Texas, has sued Biden as a defendant 19 times in a year. Of those 19 lawsuits, 8 of them, okay, I'm a lawyer, so I can't really do math that well, but that's almost half of them. Yep, right? A little bit under half, okay? A little bit less than half are immigration related. And so again, Attorney General Paxton is looking at the nature of the problem, and he says, this immigration crisis, for which Joe Biden bears total responsibility, is an existential threat to the United States of America and to the state of Texas. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to drag his butt to court. I'm going to sue him left and right. And so Ken pointed out the fact that this state-level pushback did in fact begin with Attorney General Paxton on day one of Inauguration Day a year ago to sue him on what DHS attempted to do, which was a 100-day freeze, a total freeze on deportations. Just a blanket freeze. Why? So that DHS, well, we kind of want to figure out what's going on with the immigration situation. We sued and we secured a decisive victory, an injunction on the administration doing this within a week of his inauguration. But since that time, we've had many, it's sort of a blessing. We enjoy suing the Biden administration. It's fun. We're sort of happy warriors, right? But it's a war that we find ourselves in that we wish we could avoid if we could, okay? But we've had to sue on things like his dissolution of the migrant protection protocols, the Remain in Mexico program. We've had to sue him over purporting to give ICE and DHS officers discretion to not make arrests or detention when they don't have discretion to make those choices. We've had to sue the Biden administration over its failure to enforce Title 42. Title 42 is a body of regulations that allow the federal government to rapidly expel aliens who are expected to have communicable diseases of public health significance, i.e. COVID. They're just not enforcing it. We've had to sue over this administration's continued implementation of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA. We've had to sue the administration over its refusal to enforce the Trump administration's public charge rule. So the public charge rule is this notion that if you're an immigrant coming into the United States and you're expected to be a net negative on public resources, we have a right under federal law to exclude you. But Joe Biden just threw it out the door, and he's not enforcing the public charge rule anymore. We found ourselves in court defending Governor Abbott's Executive Order number 37, which is an outstanding executive order that prohibits any party from participating in the intrastate transportation knowingly of illegal aliens. The Biden administration has sued us, and we're fighting that out in district court right now. Okay? The list goes on and on and on of topics that we've had to sue under. But understand that Attorney General Paxton is looking across the powers that he has derived from the Constitution, which is ultimately derived from the people, and he's taking his role as a protector of what this Biden administration is doing to Texas. The problems are massive, but we're doing everything that we can. And I'll tell you, this is the last thing I'll say. The strategy of suing the Biden administration has been extraordinarily successful. Of all of the lawsuits in which there has been movement in federal court, okay, so of those 26, sometimes, courts are slow, right? But of those 26 in which there has been movement, Attorney General Paxton has secured a 92% win rate against this administration. That's how, thank you. That's how obviously unlawful its conduct is. That courts everywhere are just shutting down this administration's agenda. And so we're happy to have these wins. We are proud to continue fighting it on behalf of the people of Texas in court. And we'll keep fighting. When he keeps messing up, we'll keep fighting.
Colonel McCraw, you and the men and women of the Department of Public Safety have what I think we can all agree is the biggest challenge, and that's on the ground, and that's to the extent that you can, filling in the gap that the federal government has left. So I'd like you to tell us today, what indications do you have so far that Operation Lone Star is having an effect? What has it accomplished, and could it improve? How could it improve?
Well, thank you first. Well, first of all, I think the chief sitting next to me was one of the best Border Patrol chiefs ever. And the men and women of Border Patrol, every day they risk their lives, and we're just fortunate to have them. They do serve a national security interest these days, and have since for the last 2 decades. People don't realize in terms since 9/11 how important securing our border is. Clearly a federal failure, not just one generation, but a bipartisan federal failure of magnitude proportions that have always had an impact on public safety and homeland security in the state of Texas, in the nation. But it's never been worse than, let's say, in the last decade. It's increasingly gotten worse. It's never been worse than this last year. 1.3 million illegal immigrants were captured by Border Patrol or turned over this year in Texas. I'm not talking about the southwest border, but in Texas. Oh, by the way, we got nearly 2/3 of the border and less than 11% of the infrastructure that has been built in other states like California, where it's near over 90% infrastructure they have?
Correct.
Yeah. So the challenge we have is, so many holes, so many gaps. How do you do it? And I can tell you, working for Governor Greg Abbott, I can't tell him, well, it's a federal responsibility. I can't tell the Texas State Legislature it's a federal responsibility, or the citizens of Texas. They're not going to stand for that. The bottom line, they expect, their border to be secured. It may not be a state responsibility, but they clearly understand in terms of the impact, not just in terms of drug trafficking. And drug trafficking is important, especially now when you're looking at fentanyl overdoses, and heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine. There's nothing that the Mexican cartels have not taken over, not just in Texas, but throughout the nation. If you've got a drug problem anywhere, a counterfeit pill problem related to fentanyl in New York City is related to an unsecured international border with Mexico. The same thing, no one talks about criminal aliens as a term we've used before, but the chief knows it well. Guess what? The criminals, you send them back and deport them after you convict them for child molestation or robbery and theft, murder, they come back. They're not really honest about it. And they come back again and again, and we see this. So it clearly has an impact on crime. It certainly does in terms of our major urban areas, but really throughout every community in Texas is impacted by an insecure border. And we certainly applaud, General Paxton in terms of stepping forward and suing the federal government. Unfortunately, suing doesn't secure the border. At the end of the day, policy disasters and catastrophes can make the border unsecure and less secure by overwhelming Border Patrol and serving as a pull and attraction of migrants around the world. And I would argue easily that we're suffering right now from a global mass migration event. We used to plan for a mass migration event, but it's always based upon a state failure in movement of people in, or an epidemic, a number of different scenarios, but never it was one that was created by the federal government. And I don't care what you tell people and advertise people, is that when they get over here and they find out they get released, guess what? They're going to call somebody and tell them they're released, plain and simple. And what that does is drives more. And if you believe the government of Mexico is helping, then you're sadly mistaken. The government of Mexico, unfortunately, as a result of an unsecured border, the Mexican cartels not only have operational control of the border, they really have operational control of Mexico through corruption, intimidation, bribery. Everything that worked in Colombia, when we went after the Colombian cartels, has failed in Mexico. Whether it's the vetted teams, bilateral task forces, some of the things I think you've been involved with, Chief, have been compromised by corruption. So you can't count on them to help us with security. It doesn't mean we try to work with them, but at the end of the day, you can spend billions of dollars in the Meridov initiative and other initiatives, and basically, you're really not contributing to securing the border. And unfortunately, this comes back, what is Texas? What's a state to do? at the end of the day. Now, we know when 1.3 million come pouring across the border, that immediately, as we saw in 2014 with the unaccompanied children, as we saw even in 2019 with the Flores decision out in California, is that what that does when they come in, what happens to our Border Patrol men and women? They're overwhelmed. They're handing out diapers, okay? They're processing people. And that's an important function, but they get off the line. It's less secure. So one of the first things that the governor did was said immediately is deploy resources. And one thing we have, I mean, from a Department of Public Safety standpoint, and the chief can speak to it, we can get somewhere fast. And we're not unionized. We don't worry about collective bargaining and stuff like that. The Texas State Trooper is told where they go, and they'll continue to do 12-hour shifts, 24/7, and deploy as long as they're asked to do or directed to by the governor. And we get that. And we got over 1,600 troops involved in that. But at the same point, when you look at securing the border, if we were talking about barriers, personnel, and technology, well, first of all, Border Patrol right now, where they were going was state-of-the-art. But where they're at right now, they got yesterday's technology for tomorrow on the detection side. There's not the infrastructure that needs to be, and they don't have the resources they need to be. You got police departments bigger than Border Patrol in the U.S. Certainly the New York City Police Department, dwarfs our Border Patrol. And they've got 2 borders. And they got Puerto Rico and other places and protectives they have to be in that regard, or expected to be. So this challenge, is really in the face, and it impacts landowners, lease owners. I mean, worried about, all the things that the families want to worry about when you want to protect your family. They're being overrun at the border. So obviously, from a state standpoint, what's been done? Well, it's easy. What's easy math is what we've been doing. Just talk about going back to March, and we can say, well, we've arrested over 10,000 people, including smugglers, drug traffickers. We've done, over 5 tons of methamphetamine they've seized. Over a total of $17 million in cash. Just things like you can run up the numbers, and even enough fentanyl to kill over. We're approaching 260 million citizens. So that's because of lethal doses and fentanyl. So they've done some things, but all the things we've done and focus, and this is something that the governor wants to be more proactive in, is that, that's what we do after they come in. The whole point of securing the border is they can't come in without being detected and interdicted. And you go back to why, for the first time ever, the state of Texas, we've always been providing direct support, we've done for the last 10 years, to the Border Patrol, because they're the lead in that regard. We don't have immigration violations at the state level, but we can certainly support them by going after traffickers and smugglers, and we do, and drugs, and cash going south and weapons going south. All of that, the department's been doing and supporting, but the difference is now is to be proactive, and being proactive is being preventive. And the only way you prevent is if you have barriers on the water, bodies on the water, and technology, plain and simple. So for the first time ever, the state of Texas is dedicating money of precious little general revenue towards building a border wall, to protect the citizens of Texas, and really the citizens of this nation, if you really want to talk about it. Moreover, you can't move, I realize that there's rules and regulations on building something. We talked a little bit about it with the chief and I. And, when you're on public safety standpoint, you can't build the dadgum thing fast enough. Now, this is not an affront or criticism in any way, shape, or form to my partners over at TxDOT. They do a great job, but it takes a while to build a road, all right? Any engineering project, and you throw the IBWC in the mix in that regard, and floodplains and hydration models, and get the engineers, and the thing never moves fast enough, and certainly doesn't move fast enough for the governor.
Are you talking about I-35 right now, or a different road?
Oh, which part?
Oh, different.
Well, north of
the whole
I-30,
thing. I don't know.
North of Waco or south of Waco? We're improved all the way up to Waco, but a little challenging on the other side of it. So, in recognition of that, what else can we do? Certainly, the governor is deployed. Well, I know up to 7,000 already over, and there's more coming in terms of National Guard. Well, that's different. We never had that opportunity before, and not to use them in a traditional sense in terms of providing administrative support or OPLPs, but actually to assist us in making arrests and being proactive. I mean, these men and women, are dedicated professionals, selfless and dedicated professionals. Many have served overseas, and there's no reason not to leverage that great capability, in which we're doing right now. Moreover, going back to the barriers, what type of barriers? Well, if you live in Val Verde County, you know, we couldn't move fast enough when we talked about Del Rio being overrun, and we had certainly the one incident under the international bridge as it relates to Haitians. So on top of that, you know, what can you do? And there's landowners that agreed and built and using National Guard and engineering company engineers of being able to build, you know, at least temporary fencing along the river on their property. And that cyclone fence with concertina wire on the top of it, you know, that works, but again, it takes some time. And of course, the latest, and we've been allowed to do, and the governor's in fact insisted that we do, is deploy concertina wire, which is razor wire, which looks evil and mean, I realize that. But by the way, when you place it down, one thing we have an advantage, it's tactical. It's something we can do now, immediately. And you can, and it doesn't, we don't have to wait for anybody to do a study or any engineering project. You can just do it. And oh, by the way, the U.S. military is pretty good at it, you know. I think they've been using that since 1917, you know, effectively. Yeah. And
I've been cut many a time on rolls of concertina wire.
There you go. You try to cut your way through it.
Oh,
whatever.
yeah, you're going to get cut up bad.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean you can't breach it. You can breach anything. In fact, if you're not careful, it'll end up as building material in Mexico, right? So bottom line is that you have to have the detection technology behind it, and you need National Guard security posts and roving guards, and then DPS troopers to support that overall effort in that regard, and recognizing that's a proactive and preventive measure is the way to do it. But unfortunately, you can't secure it unless you do it at the river. You can't secure it from Washington, D.C., clearly, okay? Certainly, the 14 times I've testified on this issue, I've really had a major impact, right? Surprised I still have my job, okay? But before Congress. But it's, at the end of the day, this isn't rocket science. This has been around a while. You know, Barry McCaffrey tasked this back when he was owned the drug czar, and I was out in, I don't know where you were. You may not have been Border Patrol yet. You're so young. But I was out in Tucson.
Looks are deceiving.
Yeah. Out in the Tucson sector, and one thing they tasked was the national laboratories in Sandia, but also there in Los Alamos, to be able to do a systematic, border-wide study based on engineers and scientists, and what do you come up with? At the end of the day, guess what? Barriers on the water. You don't want to arrest after they come in. You want to be able to prevent them from coming in. Detection technology and sufficient personnel. Plain and simple. Well, you know, nothing's changed in 2 decades, or over 2 decades, in terms of the solution. But there's not been the willingness or the leadership in D.C. to be able to do it. You know, I get it. It's expensive. We understand that, but it's far more costly. Okay, I got 1 minute, huh? But it doesn't bother me. 1 minute, I can keep it 1 minute.
Well, we have a cue that we will have audience participation, question and answer period. So anyone keep that in mind. And when we come to that, we'll recognize you and we'll have a mic come to you. But first, we have a few more questions. I know, but some of our best questions are always from the audience. So, but I'd like Chief Scott to evaluate a little bit what you see as the accomplishments of Operation Lone Star, what it's done for Border Patrol, and how it can improve as well.
Sure. So the number one thing I think everybody needs to take away from this for Operation Lone Star specific is every one of those statistics the Colonel talked about would have been in St. Louis, Chicago, D.C., somewhere else, without ever being vetted. Let me explain what that means. ICE may still release somebody after they get him or whatever else, and that individual may make it into the United States, but at least we know who they are. Because I believe the issue is not immigration. I believe the issue is public safety. And just think about your home for a minute, because border security is exactly the same as your home. We just expect people to come to the front door, announce themselves, we decide who enters. If they come in any other way, there's a response, and in Texas it's a little more aggressive than in most states, I think, right? But my point is that at the end of the day, we just need to know who's here. So Texas DPS and National Guard stepping into the gap that the Biden administration created, no matter what other people argue about, like at the end, what happens, at least they're being fingerprinted and they're photographed. And if they're criminals, Texas can step in and take an action. If they're on the terrorist watch list, the FBI is going to respond and take an action. If there's any action that can be taken legally, it's going to be taken. Please don't, because it is expensive, and this is a federal responsibility. Texas has really taken a huge hit. And even public safety in other areas, because those DPS troopers, I believe, were probably fully employed wherever they were pulled from. So I'm not discounting that, but these would have been gotaways. These would be people that are in our country wandering around with whatever's on their backpack. Beyond that, and I'll make it really quick, it would be a gap in border security that the cartel would be driving trucks of who knows what through. So it's not just the statistics. The DPS is really providing what I believe for the whole country, and it's in Texas, but it is the whole country, a level of safety and security that the federal government cannot do right now, because I'll just go back to Del Rio. That Del Rio fiasco with the Haitians under the bridge, it depends on who you talk to, but my sources, I was out by then, but my sources within Border Patrol, minimum 130 miles of border without a single Border Patrol agent on it for well over a week. What came through that gap, right? And if Texas DPS wasn't out there, then we would never know. But luckily, the visual of the Iron Curtain, messaging matters. So the world got an invitation to come to the United States on January 20th of last year. And Texas DPS standing up and doing press conferences and everything else was just as important to say, hey, maybe not here. So we've seen a significant increase in traffic in Arizona, a little bit in California. There's still a lot of argument whether that was a deflection or not, because the numbers went so high that literally it changed the dynamics. But I firmly believe on my 30 years of experience that Lone Star is making a huge impact to keep this country safe in a way the federal government has chose not to. By the way, shout out, the agents want to do their job. They're just being held back from doing it because they're being overwhelmed processing and babysitting.
I know Aaron wants to weigh in.
Yeah, so very briefly on Operation Lone Star, obviously Attorney General Paxton hugely supportive of it, but one thing I want to address that you may have seen in the headlines over the past few days is this: the headlines are reading, Travis County State Judge rules that Operation Lone Star is unconstitutional. This is fake news. It's fake news. That's not what the judge ruled. Operation Lone Star is 100% constitutional. Attorney General Paxton will defend its constitutionality in court, okay? All that happened is you have a Democrat judge with a Democrat district attorney who together invited a bunch of Democrat press into the courtroom, and then the Democrat press just regurgitated all of the talking points from the district attorney, in which they made the argument that Operation Lone Star is unconstitutional. But just because the local Soros-funded district attorney made the argument that Operation Lone Star is unconstitutional doesn't mean that it is unconstitutional. It's airtight, it's legally airtight, and Attorney General Paxton is proud to defend Operation Lone Star from its attacks from the left in court.
I know, but thank you. That's good, well said. It's amazing that criminal trespassing, all of a sudden, it's been around on statute for many, many years. It becomes unconstitutional or linked to immigration in some way, shape, or form. I guess if you're here illegally, I guess we need to check and see whether we can charge them with a state crime, depending on what it is. But nevertheless, is that, one thing that the governor's made it very clear, I think members have, and he's expressed it, is that Texas doesn't need anybody's permission to protect its citizens, plain and simple. And as long as, as long as Texans are Texans, that's always going to be that way.
And that goes to the last question from the panel. Let's a round of applause for that. At Texas Public Policy Foundation, we have a border security coalition that's focused simultaneously on what needs to be done, and getting it done to stop the human smuggling and the human trafficking, the deadly drugs that are coming in. And several members of our coalition, including the former acting Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security and former Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli, has advocated for the explicit invocation of the state's constitutional Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, power to repel an invasion. So I'd like to ask Colonel McCraw, are you as Director of DPS prepared to use that power by the state of Texas, which would involve going a step further and actually doing the job of forcibly returning illegal border crossers back into Mexico?
Well, I'll do whatever the governor directs, bottom line, in the state legislature. And I know he's as proactive as possibly can be, and he's made it very clear that our job is, I wouldn't shake your head on that. I get that, but believe me, he ain't no Governor Abbott, okay? So bottom line is, politics aside, is that we'll do whatever we can. Right now, we don't have those tools. We can't arrest somebody based upon an immigration violation. It's not a state violation, period. And guess what? We're strict adherents to the Constitution, regardless of what you hear in the media. Bottom line is we're always going to follow the rules. As Justice Warren said, he may have been criticized, but he had this right, is the police must obey the law, okay, when they're enforcing the law, and we do so.
So we have time for maybe one or two questions. Please stand and raise your hand and wait for a mic to come. I think one of my colleagues, Julie, will come out. Julie, we have a question up here. Let's go to our front table here on the right.
Thank you. Oh, okay. Chair number 2, and I apologize. What is your name again? No, yes.
Rodney Scott.
Rodney Scott.
Yeah, I'm with Texas Public Policy. I was the former chief for U.S. Border Patrol.
Yeah, I wanted to say I appreciate what you did for our country. I know your job was not easy. I absolutely understand that, and I appreciate you. My question is that I am hearing that the cartels now are beginning to force the government of Mexico to align with them, which means if this keeps going, we now have not just the cartels, but the entire government against their northern neighbor. And is that true? And what can we do about it?
So that's a complicated question. I'll try to avoid a little bit of the politics, but I'll just tell you separating. So I have some good partners over the years in Mexico, but separating true cartel from the government is often challenging. The corruption is at many, many levels. So formally turning the government against the U.S., I highly doubt that because the response from the U.S. would be overwhelming. That's just not even a good business decision. But the fact that behind the scenes there are people in key positions in the Mexican government that protect the cartel, that share information with the cartel is just well known. Some recent articles came out. I highly encourage you to look at those. That is a challenging threat, and not enough people talk about it. I think we should be able to talk about the corruption problems in Mexico without insulting everybody in Mexico, right? I think Newt Gingrich and a few others are the only ones that talk about the tactics down there being the equivalent to terrorists in the Middle East. But the journalists are killed left and right, so they don't report on it. You have to actively go look for the information. It's just not going to be fed to you. So it is a challenge.
One more question. Let's go with gentleman up here, too.
I appreciate everything that's been said. Colonel, there's no doubt of what state you're for. If you can't see his boots, that spells out Texas.
Yeah, it does have Texas.
Those are awesome.
Part of my contract.
A couple of things I think that we could do is get about 5 buses and take the immigrants up to Delaware and let them suffer with what they suffer with. The fentanyl problem is very dangerous. I've lost a grandson with it by laced fentanyl, and fentanyl, all it takes is a grain or so. And these drugs that they're taking or getting off the street are being laced by them. And the cartel and them are profiting. And the last thing I just want to say is, how in the hell did the Haitians get over here? I know they didn't swim. And I think all the Latin countries emptied their jail cells because they aren't sending us the best people. Anyway, those are just my thoughts.
Well, I can talk to the chief can talk to the Haitians, but there was substantial Haitians living in South America and other parts of the we'll call it Western Hemisphere. It had already been relocated. So when we talk about the surge that came up, the tri-border area and those areas, that's where they were coming from, and some in Mexico as well.
So let me touch on that just real quick. They were invited. So they weren't in Haiti. They were exactly what the colonel said was accurate, but it's not been really publicly discussed. The Biden administration made a decision to stop deporting Haitians and to stop using Title 42 specifically against the Haitians. Nowadays, with your cell phone, it takes about 20 seconds for that to go around the world, and they basically felt invited to the United States, so they all came.
You know, actually, that just about wraps up the time we have. I apologize. Well, we can. Okay, we'll go over our time with one more question. All right.
Colonel, with regard to the state of Texas, if we made changed the law from a misdemeanor to a felony, that's one way I understand that we might be able to stem some of that flow.
Yes, we will obviously, you know, certainly as a deterrent aspect of it. But right now, something that we were never doing before was enforcing criminal trespass on Texas land. Even though someone came in across and went through land and tore it up, there was too many of them. At the same point, not enough jail space. There wasn't even the ability through county attorneys to be able to process that. And of course, one of the things that the governor has done is allowed us to use TDCJ in one of their prisons to be able to extend it as a jail and use it to increase the capacity. We're working on doing the same thing, further east and more into the Rio Grande Valley, not just in terms of the Del Rio sector, to increase that capacity, which is very important. Because he declared a disaster, the penalties after someone's convicted, the penalty actually goes up. It doesn't change it from what it is right now. But primarily felonies that we're catching right now have to do with drugs and smugglers, and of course felony pursuits and evasions right now, and that's where we're at.
All right, we're going to conclude with a 3.5-minute video on the issue of the drug cartels and the drug trafficking. We will do that, but before we do, will you join me in offering a round of applause for these great patriots? Thank you all very much.
The cartels in Mexico are something to be reckoned with. These organizations are highly sophisticated, highly organized in intelligence, and of course, unlimited budgets in the multi-millions and billions of dollars that they're making. The estimate in Del Rio is that the cartel on the other side is making $25 million a week. Down in the Rio Grande Valley, they're making $14 million a day.
Drug smugglers are apprehended daily throughout our sector. Since this new administration has come in, drug apprehensions have gone down because they're dealing so much with family units. But that doesn't mean that drugs aren't coming across. It just means that apprehensions are gone down because they've avoided detection. In my opinion, I think we're losing a lot more than what we were in the past, which is disheartening, very disheartening.
We're on our ranch here. We don't have the traditional illegal aliens that walk across the river like most people see on the news or on social media. What we have out here a lot of times are boats that will come across from Mexico, and usually they're dropping drugs. They have partners on the ground that they will call, and those partners will then quickly move to pick up whatever's been dropped and then leave the ranch as quickly as possible. My husband alone has caught 2 different loads of 350 pounds of drugs in less than a week, just from us sitting on the front porch watching the traffic.
Border Patrol gets called from ranchers, hey, we see people with backpacks coming across dressed in camouflage, all males and, anywhere from groups of 10 to 30, sometimes more, and Border Patrol can't get out there because they're so tied up. And the cartels know this. They'll distract the agents with family units and then bring their drugs through other areas.
Del Rio apprehensions are up 393%, 97,000 plus versus 19,000. Stash house arrests are up 365%. A single adult arrest 459%. Sex offenders, this is a number that's staggering to me, 2,533%. I think these numbers are up because people knew that they were going to be allowed in.
And these are the ones that we know about. The gotaways, nobody knows. They try to estimate based on the numbers of apprehensions that they have. If we have 100,000 apprehended, we could potentially have an additional 200,000 or 300,000 individuals undetected that made it into the country.
And I think that's one of my biggest concerns. MS-13 is huge. We've known for years that they've worked with other factions, to help infiltrate our communities.
It's gotten to the point where Mexico has lost control of their country. It is lawlessness in that country, and now that lawlessness has spilled over to the U.S. as we see this administration not enforcing any immigration laws. The open borders policy only aids and abets these cartels to continue to take advantage of that crime surge. We need to see what we can solve to make America better and protect our sovereignty.